Hello, hi, viewer. Welcome back to my video again, or welcome back to my channel. Now, this video will be slightly different because unlike the rest of the video, this video will be presented in English. I will also do another video which is the same uh, topic as this video, but that video I will use 普通话 or Chinese or Mandarin to present it. This video, the topic is Hainan Free Trade Port and what would be the impact of Hainan Free Trade Port on Singapore and what is my view regarding this. So for this topic, we actually make a point to travel all the way to Hainan. So we actually flew to Hainan to understand a little bit better after Hainan Free Trade Port was officially announced on the 18th or start operating on the 18th December 2025. But actually, to be precise, to be very honest, the reason why we go Hainan is also because when we check the air ticket from Singapore to Hainan was the cheapest then. So we make a trip to Hainan in January 2026. So for two ways air tickets from Hainan Airline is under $300 Sing. So it's a very value for money trip for us. And also because of the free trade port, we think that as a Singapore Hainanese, as a retired Singapore Hainanese, I could go there and take a look and then come back and present my opinion and my view to all my viewers, and hopefully you all can benefit from my videos. Now, for this topic, Hainan Free Trade Port, there are a lot of videos being produced by other commenter or blogger or YouTuber, all this. So they actually there are actually two camps. One said that with this Hainan Free Trade Port, Singapore will face a lot of difficulty. Another camp will say that Singapore don't have to worry about this free trade port and everything will be as per normal because the location, the strategic importance of Singapore cannot be overtaken by Hainan Free Trade Port and whatsoever. So I think my view regarding this is when China government Xi Jinping announced the free trade port idea and start to roll out the plan to convert Hainan to the world largest free trade port in the world in 2018, I don't think they are trying to compare themselves to Singapore, or they have any intention to do with Singapore. There's nothing at all. Now, the misconception is whenever China does something, or China does this, does that, a lot of people will start to say that China is doing all this to catch up with Singapore. So that conception is a little bit incorrect in my view, because if you have this perception, then you think that Singapore is ahead of China, is on top of China. So is this correct? I think we have to look at numbers. But again, I'm not here to sing praises about China. I just want to look at numbers and facts objectively so that we can come to a very a fair comparison. Now, number one, so like what I mentioned, the Hainan Free Trade Port got nothing to do with Singapore. Okay, nothing to do with taking over Singapore position, trying to take business away with Singapore. No, I think the focus is too narrow if you look at this aspect. Chinese government got no time to bother what happened elsewhere. They do this to benefit their own people. They do this to benefit their own economy. They are in a different economic structure compared to Singapore, compared to other countries. So I do not believe that when Xi Jinping actually wanted to convert Hainan into the largest free trade port, he wanted to challenge Singapore as the one of the very important seaport or hub in the world. So let's look at some numbers to more or less help all my viewer to understand that despite the fact that Singapore GDP per capita is higher than China, it doesn't mean that whatever China does, they are trying to catch up, replace, or overtake Singapore. So this is a little bit some prejudice or bias kind of view. Now, let me give you an example. Singapore GDP per capita is higher than UK, is higher than USA, is higher than many Western countries. But when all these Western countries do something, no one will say that they are trying to overtake Singapore, they are going to win Singapore, they're going to kick Singapore out, or Singapore will be in trouble. No. So I think to compare Hainan Free Trade Port as a way or a strategic deployment of the Chinese government to deal with Singapore is not correct. I don't think they have the time. I don't think they need to deal with Singapore. Neither are they falling far behind from Singapore, or neither are they willing to or willing to replace Singapore or whatsoever, or steal the business away from Singapore. When it comes to this point, I will elaborate later. So let's look at some number first. I think before we continue, let's look at some number to erase that kind of prejudice first. Is Hainan or China all the way out to replace Singapore, or are they really so behind, or is Singapore behind? So these are the things that we have to be very clear first. Okay, so now I'm going to show you some numbers, and so that you can form your own opinion regarding what is right, what is wrong. So let's look at some number. Now, the first slide, I'm going to compare the size of Hainan, to another 3 free trade port in elsewhere. So you might ask me, how many free trade port are there in the world? So in the whole world, including free trade port, free trade zone, there are about 3,500 of them globally. So there are some video who say that China set up Hainan Free Trade Port is to create a conduit for back-end capital outflow in case of needs. It's also ensure the working capital cash flow management of company who operating in Hainan has a better chance of compared to those operating in mainland China because of the segregation of the lower tariff cost or the import-export duty incurred. So again, if that is correct, then a lot of the global free trade zone or free trade port, they don't have capital control. So if that's the case, then it doesn't gel in with this argument, because if you think that Hainan Free Trade Port is the conduit created by the Chinese government to allow some back-end outflow of capital or inflow of capital on vice versa, then it doesn't gel with the rest of the few thousand free trade port, free trade zone set up globally, whereby a lot of these countries who has free trade port doesn't have capital control. So now let's look at this slide. So Singapore is a free trade port, Dubai is a free trade port, Hong Kong likewise. So now what if you compare the size of Hainan to the size of these three free trade ports? So one Hainan is equal to 46 Singapore. One Hainan is equal to 46 Singapore, and one Hainan is equal to 8 Dubai, and one Hainan is equal to 30 Hong Kong. So for this video, I'm going to focus on the comparison between Hainan and Singapore, just to erase the prejudice or the misconception that whatever China does, they are trying to replace Singapore, kick Singapore out, or overtake Singapore. I think this our focus is a little bit too narrow and might not lead the viewer to a correct opinion of what is going on. So that's the reason why I'm doing all this. Now, the second slide that you see will be comparing Hainan to Singapore regarding their GDP performance since 2018 to 2025. So when I talk about this slide, I do not convert the GDP of these two areas into US dollar so that the numbers here will be purely on the performances of these two areas rather than being affected by fluctuation in currency. So if you look at Hainan for the year 2018 to 2025, the GDP of Hainan actually increased from renminbi 500 billion to renminbi 811 billion. So the increase of Hainan GDP was 62% over this period. So let look at Singapore. Singapore in 2018, Singapore managed to achieve a Sing dollar 377 billion in GDP. And in 2025, Singapore achieved a Sing dollar 574 billion GDP. So the growth rate was 52%. Now, if you purely look at the growth rate of GDP, then factually, Hainan already above Singapore. And you do not forget that you should remember that during this period 2018 to 2025, unlike Singapore, China faced a lot of tariff, sanctions, and obstacle from the Western country. Not only USA but a lot of other Western country. So under this difficult condition, Hainan GDP in local currency still achieve a higher growth than Singapore. So this a naked factual figure should be able to erase all kind of prejudice that China or even Hainan is trying to catch up. They do have their own merits and they have their strong point. I don't know. I shouldn't say which is above, which is below. But again, I just want to say that it's incorrect to always compare what China intend to do to what Singapore is today. So I don't think that we should worry that what China is doing now is going to replace or take over Singapore economic position in global trade and all these things. So I will come to that in details later. So now let's look at the third slide. The third slide is regarding FDI, foreign direct investment. For this one, is quite straightforward. If you look at again, it's 2018 to 2025, the numbers. Now, Hainan as an island, they managed to attract only 733 million FDI in the year 2018. But for 2025, they managed to reach 3.5 billion. So from here, you can see that the growth rate is actually 378%. So it's about 4 times. How about Singapore? In the same period, Singapore actually moved up the FDI from 77 billion US to 143 billion US. So the growth rate was over this period is 85.7%. Now, immediately you can see that the growth rate in FDI in Hainan is much higher than the growth rate in FDI in Singapore. So from this aspect, we can actually say that the implementation of the free trade zone announced in 2018, which they were doing in 2020, and by 2025, Xi Jinping wanted to convert Hainan Island into a free trade port. This policy actually helped Hainan to attract higher growth in FDI as compared to Singapore. And like I mentioned just now, China and Hainan actually face a lot of sanctions from the tariff challenges and all kind of restrictions from the Western country, and yet they still can receive this out of FDI. So that showed that the free trade port or free trade zone policy implemented by the government, Chinese government, did help Hainan to achieve much better economic performance if this policy is without. Meaning if Xi Jinping or the Chinese government did not implement this policy. So that will also show that there are a lot of videos who say that, oh, the FTP, the Hainan free trade port got nothing, did not push up the property prices in Hainan, did not bring a big bang to the business activity in Hainan. When they go to the street on the 19th of December 2005, they don't see a lot of celebration, they see things as per normal. I think from these numbers, you can see that now, implementing of a free trade zone or free trade port throughout a period of time the incremental impact on the local economy uh, is gradual. You don't see overnight changes. So for those people who expect, oh, on the 18th December 2025, when FTP was formally implemented by the Chinese and Hainan's government, they wanted to see a big bang on the street or the business district. No, this is unrealistic. A lot of things already start moving, start operating, start building up since 2018. So this whole thing has been there ongoing, and the numbers show that the implementation of the free trade zone of Hainan and the free trade port of Hainan actually helped push Hainan to bring in more FDI to achieve a much higher economic growth as compared to Singapore, despite the fact that Hainan is under a very difficult operating environment because during this period, China faced COVID-19, which is faced by every country in the world, but they also face sanction, tariff, and all kind of restriction from Western country. Now, another numbers will also more or less reflect the importance, or sorry, the irrelevance of comparing what China does or the Hainan FTP to Singapore. So again, like I always stress, it's not something that they launched to take over Singapore. They have no time to worry about Singapore or to steal business away from Singapore. Knowing the Chinese government, whatever they do is for very, very long-term planning and to be beneficial to their local economy, to the local people. The way Singapore is being operated and the way China is being operated is never the same, because the scale, the size, the dynamics of the underlying economy are totally different. So now let's look at another slide for the tourist arrival, a tourist arrival in these two places like Hainan and Singapore. Now again, if we look at this slide, for 2018 to 2025, Hainan achieved a 40% growth in tourist arrival, both local and foreign. Now again, everybody during this period of time were badly affected by the COVID-19. So likewise, Hainan also the same, China also the same, but yet Hainan achieved a growth of 40% increase in tourist arrival. Now, of course, this tourist arrival include those business person who go to Hainan to explore business opportunity, to find out what would be the upcoming free trade zone, the upcoming free trade port that has been just implemented in 2025. So you can see that the trend is building up. A lot of people is going there, or a lot of people are going there. Now, for Singapore, what is the tourist arrival numbers? Now, for the same period, 2018 to 2025, Singapore actually achieved a 18.5 million tourist arrival in the year 2018. But after the COVID-19, we have still yet to recover back to the previous level. So in 2025, we only have 16.9 million tourists. And on a year from 2018 to 2025, Singapore actually experienced a negative 8.6% growth in the tourist arrival. So this compared to 40% growth in Hainan tourist arrival is a huge contrast. And all these things just reassure or reconfirm that whatever China is trying to do, they are not trying to catch up with Singapore. They are not trying to replace Singapore. Neither are they worried about Singapore or they are trying to compete with Singapore. No, when they form this policy, I don't think Singapore is in the planning blueprint. What they do is to make sure that the whole China economy can sustain and can continue according to their cultural issue, the structural issue, the unique way of socialism, and how the local people can benefit the most from all this policy. And if we don't compare Hainan to Singapore, maybe we look at a wider picture. Let's see. A lot of people, or maybe the reason why I want to talk about the next slide is that when I go to Hainan this time, I actually ask a lot of the local people, hotel manager, taxi driver, bus driver, and a lot of other people regarding the free trade port. and not surprisingly, a lot of these people say that nothing happened, everything still as per normal. They don't think it will be successful. It's very quiet. A lot of people complaining that the life is still, the living cost is still high, despite the fact that a lot of things are there's no import duties and whatsoever. Um, there's one taxi driver from Henan. He actually drove taxi. He actually drive taxi in China for the last 8 years. In Hainan for the last 8 years. He was the only person that is very optimistic. He just said that this FTP, the Hainan FTP, is going to do wonder to Hainan, and the reason why he's so confident is based on the execution capability of the central government of of China. So now, based on what he say, let's see whether does this is there any areas we can show some numbers to support the execution power of Chinese government, and whereby whereby China is the second largest economy in the world right now. So if you look at this slide, we can compare Singapore to Shenzhen. Because Shenzhen was started after Deng Xiaoping visited Singapore, and after he went back to China, he actually opened up Shenzhen as one of the special economic zone among the first few. So there are Shanghai, Shenzhen, and likewise Xiamen and Shantou. So Shenzhen become a special economic zone. Now, Shenzhen GDP right now actually is higher than Singapore. So it's about 10% higher, maybe 5 to 10% higher for the latest figure, 2025. I think Shenzhen is about close to 600 billion. Singapore is about 570 plus billion, something like that. So the factual numbers is Shenzhen already exceeded Singapore in terms of GDP. Now, how long does Shenzhen need to achieve this sort of performance? Actually, Shenzhen just took 46 years. If you look at this slide, Shenzhen only took 46 years to exceed Singapore. And Singapore is now, just at my age, I'm 60 years old. So Singapore is the same age as me. So Singapore actually took 60 years to reach this level. So from here, you can more or less judge the execution power, the determination of the Chinese government to really get things done. Now, let's zoom in even further to compare free trade zone versus or the execution of free trade zone in China versus the economic performance of Singapore. Maybe we zoom in further on this area so that viewers can have a better understanding. Do they really have the execution power or to do something even better? Not a catch up, not a replace, but and this number that I'm going to show you all later on would also reinforce my opinion whether would the Hainan free trade port be successful or not successful. So let's look at one of the first free trade zone that implemented in Shanghai called the Shanghai Zimao Qu. So this one was set up among the first in China, and let's look at some numbers. Okay, now for the area of the free trade zone of Shanghai is about 4% of Singapore total area. So the size of the Shanghai free trade zone is 4% of Singapore. Now the total value of the import-export activities or the value in terms of Sing dollar, in terms of US dollar of the Shanghai free trade zone is equivalent to 36% of Singapore. So you can see that such a small area compared to Singapore, which is about 700 square kilometer, that Shanghai free trade zone is about 29 square kilometer. For such a small area, 4% of Singapore, the amount of economic activities in terms of import values and export value is about 30% of Singapore. So from here, you can see that actually with a backing of a critical mass behind, the free trade zone or free trade port could achieve the same kind of spectacular performance under a very determined government. Now let's talk about. So I hope the slide above more or less erase the kind of prejudice or misconception that the Chinese when whatever the Chinese government is doing is to try to compete with Singapore or try to do something to overtake Singapore or try to give Singapore some difficulty. So those slides that I presented just now, just to let people know, let viewers know that actually China is not below or behind. They have achieved much better result in many areas as compared to Singapore. I try to make it apple to apple kind of. So you see the tourism, you see the GDP growth, you see the dynamic of Shanghai Free Trade Zone, and the contribution of Shanghai Free Trade Zone to the whole China economy. So in view of the size of the Hainan Island, which is slightly smaller than Taiwan, Hainan is the second largest island of China. Like I mentioned, it is 46 times of Singapore. So you just imagine if Hainan Free Trade Port is properly implemented, the potential, in my view, is tremendous. Is tremendous. But again, let me assure, I do not think, and I don't see any sign that the Chinese government is doing this to steal business away from Singapore or to replace Singapore. And why do I have this opinion? Because you see, as a free trade zone, a simple theory is this: as a free trade zone, the main objective is to promote trade, right? A free trade port, you want trades. Now, a free trade port will never flourish in a region where all the neighboring countries are poor. So, assuming you are a rich man, you are in a region whereby all your neighbors are poor and they don't produce anything, they don't demand anything. So, the importance of this free trade port will be much lesser compared to another free trade port which is located in country that are much richer. So China do not want to steal business. China does not want the Hainan Free Trade Port to steal business away from Singapore, steal business away from Vietnam, steal business away from Philippines, Malaysia, or the surrounding country. No, I do not think so. And later I will stress on that point using another slide. So again, those slides that I show in on top more or less erase the kind of prejudice that, number one, China is not behind, neither and it's not right that we compare China and Singapore as if China is trying to catch up with Singapore. The answer is no. Neither should we have the prejudice that China is below us. Looking at the numbers, they are not below us. They have their own thing to do. They have their own business to handle. So number three thing is that when they plan for this Hainan Free Trade Port, they do have their own strategic deployment objective, which I will cover later. Okay, so we take a break now and I will continue this video with more information and hope you like my video. Thank you.